Hello, and welcome to our City Council discussion meeting Tuesday, September 14th. Few little housekeeping things before we get started. I want to remind everybody to mute your cell phones. Council members, please put your cell phones where they will not distract you during the meeting. And with that, we can call the roll.
Councilmember Babcock.
Present.
Councilmember Bacon.
Present.
Councilmember Draheim.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Watson.
Here.
Mayor Gregg.
Here. And the next item is the approval of the agenda. I do have one late add. Do we move approval and then add? Is that how that works, or can we amend it before we amend it? I guess I'll amend it before we amend it. This was a legal item. It is too pressing to wait until our next meeting on October 4th. So we have to add it now. Unfortunately, we just got notice of it today. So I would like to add as item 6.1 and then renumber the discussion items after that accordingly. Consideration of a motion to approve Attorney David Middleman and the Bernstein and Whites and Luxembourg law firm's recommendation to vote to approve the can you help me with that pronunciation? Mellencroft bankruptcy reorganization plan to allow for the distribution to the city of East Lansing in the municipality opioids litigation claims. With that as an amendment, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Moved by Draheim, seconded by Babcock. That will become our new item 6.1. Okay. Communication from the audience. I do have some public comment cards already. Because this is a discussion meeting, we are going to do all of the public comment up front regardless. Thank you so much of what item you are here to speak on. So I've got these divided a little bit for consistency. I'm starting with Ann Hill, who lists her topic as public comment. Hi, Ann.
Good evening, Mayor and the council members. I hope you all received the written comments that I emailed over to City Council email address and took the opportunity to read it in detail. I won't repeat the details of that email tonight. Since 1996, City Council has defined strategic priorities to guide the manner in which the city allocates and spends our tax dollars and other revenues. I focused on strong, safe, diverse community in my email yesterday. The second priority identified in the 2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, or CAFRs, is vibrant economy and development. I agree that the diverse businesses and creativity help to establish a sound economy. In my opinion, the food truck industry that blossomed after the pandemic was very successful business development. Small business owners, historically the backbone of the American economy, responded to a customer need of providing safe, affordable, and convenient food options for our community, while several indoor dining options were not available to or convenient. In our neighborhood, this option has received overwhelming approval from our residents and has been fruitful for the food truck vendors as well. The strategic priorities identify good governance as having the primary role of providing high-quality services in the most efficient, cost-effective, and transparent manner. In my opinion, tracking how many times a year a neighborhood association has a block party with a vendor food truck is none of those items. May I suggest that spending time on resolving issues with our $100 million pension liability, the enormous debt we have committed to in replacing the water and sewer infrastructure that is around another $100 million, the significant economic impacts over the past 18 and plus months, not only to our downtown merchants, but to residents of the city. Several residents have lost their jobs, are working with reduced hours, or work for GM or suppliers that are on layoff due to part shortages. I have friends that work at General Motors and have been laid off since early July, and reports are that they may not be back to work until December or later. Rising inflation shows no end in sight for the near future. To anyone who has been in the grocery store recently and purchased meat, been at the gas station to refill their tank, or received their utility bill, this is very obvious and painful. I hear talk about wanting affordable housing in East Lansing, but do not see how outrageous spending pattern that the city has taken in this, help us take us in that direction. In fact, I believe it is becoming less affordable every day. These are my opinions. May I share with you some comments from some Hawk Nest homeowners when they heard what regulations the city was imposing on neighborhood associations and food trucks? Quote, "That is so stupid. Don't take our food trucks away," end quote. Second one, "Don't they have more important things to regulate?" Bob and Sarah Cunningham said, "Wish they had never heard about our trucks." Another one, "Does that stop someone from hiring them and having them park at their house?" I'm more worried about what will happen with the student housing surrounding us as they continue to build downtown. They should worry about more about that than what the neighborhood food trucks are, what neighborhoods food trucks are in. And finally, OMG, too much regulation. Wish the government would just stay in their lane. Geesh. So those are the comments from our neighborhood. May I offer to council and the city a quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson: "The best government is that which governs least." I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ann, and I have got some clarifying comments for that that I will use during my comments
Okay,
to
perfect.
address some of your issues. Next person on my list is Alison Merode. I'm sorry, Alison, can you pronounce your last name for us? Miraud, perfect. And I failed to mention that we were limiting public comment to 5 minutes, so you've got 5 minutes.
That's fine.
And
I
we
will
will
not
warn you
take
when
that
we get
long.
close. Okay, thanks.
So I just wanted to come and introduce myself and kind of put a face to some of the issues that we've been facing as part of the construction and flooding that has been occurring in the Glencairn neighborhood. I live on North Lawn. We have lived in our house for almost 7 years, and until this summer have never flooded. And so far this summer, we have flooded 4 times. We have lost countless items. We have torn up our floors. We've had to replace sewer lines. It's just been miserable. So I'm just kind of working on finding every outlet that I can to see if the city will kind of work with us and hopefully take some responsibility for some of this construction that's going on. Ours conveniently started 3 days after the construction started, so it seems very correlated. So I just have a couple really quick points. First, I think that we'll need to investigate into the contract work that is going on. It seems like a lot of the investigations so far have been internally within the city, within the contractor, and then with the city's insurance company. So if there's any outlet to have external parties investigate into this a little bit, that would be great. And then our main concern with the construction has been that it appears that they're using equipment that is quite large for a residential neighborhood. It seems to be putting undue burden on our infrastructure, and that's just been kind of a concern from the get-go for us. And I think if I had one ask, and this hasn't been clear in our updates that we've received, just being on North Lawn with the the drains are about 2 inches above where the road is graded right now. So I think that's contributing to a lot of the flooding because the water is just running down the street and totally bypassing the storm drains. So if we can make sure, I know that the contractors are going to pause construction once some things are finished, that gets paved by winter, because that would just be even more miserable for everyone involved. So those are my concerns. I obviously have a lot more information. I'm happy to speak more and to see if there's anything we can work out, but that's what I have.
Thank you, Allison. And I have had a chance to bring up some of those things with staff, but not all of them, so I will add them to my personal to-do list, and maybe we can get you some more information. Okay. Moving on, these are comments that are related to specific agenda items. So this is 6.1, which is the, now 6.2, I guess, since we've amended the agenda, the felony firearm charges from the County Prosecutor, Ralph Monsma, if you would like to come and address council.
Yes, and welcome. I haven't been here for a while. I've been busy with my grandchildren down south quite a bit, and this is a pleasure to see you all. And, of course, as one of the first in-person meetings, it seems to me this is great. I just would like to say that I am thoroughly in favor of what the prosecutor is doing. She has been a welcome change in terms of the direction that we've been taking, and I have had many conversations with her over the years, and I think she's looking for the opportunity to make things a little bit fairer, a little bit more transparent. She has tried from time to time to get a lot more data relative to what's going on. That has not always been successful because of cutbacks in terms of funding for her office and that sort of thing, but she has tried often to make sure that the decisions that she's making is based on real information and not just a pass-through. I don't want to comment a lot. I do not know the insides out of felony firearm. From what the people from John Cooper's office, Safe and Just Michigan, is that right? Safe and Just Michigan, I think? Anyhow, it used to have a different name which was much more impressive, but this one is much more to the point, so I like that name. Anyhow, it seems to me that the biggest single thing that we can do is make sure that people understand that firearms are an issue, and to make it clear that we're hoping that they will not use them. And the question that the messaging on that is the biggest single thing. And the introduction to this particular proposal, the two-paragraph thing that you are supposed to be voting on, and I hope you do not vote on it because it needs much more discussion before that, but is it's so clear that there are nuances in terms of all of those 5 points underneath it in terms of the types of things that can happen under there. Most people don't understand it in the first place, and the people who are here in East Lansing, for the most part, do not get involved with firearms things, so it's not even a major thing for us to consider as far as I'm concerned. When the sheriff put this out, he said, you know, this is increasing nationwide. Yes, it is, but it has, you know, fluctuated nationwide a lot, and the business of firearms is a big deal. There's no doubt about that. But from the standpoint of focusing specifically for East Lansing to take a position on this, we need to talk about it more before we would do something like that. And the idea of reducing the amount of time spent in jails is one of the top priorities for any number of reasons. This 5-minute limit, I could go way beyond for a long time.
You're good,
But
you got a minute and a half.
anyhow, so I'm saying, let's cool this business. Let's not make any, major changes at this point. Let Carol get on with the business of showing what she can do, and I'm sure the opportunity to watch that is going to leave a better impression than the hallmark that if you've got a gun somewhere in the place, that you're going to get 2 years, which means people in jail. And frankly, we don't need any more people in jail if we can do a better job. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mansfield. I appreciate that. On the same topic, Frank Dennis.
No comment.
Okay. Christine Root on the same topic.
I think this is a little less muffled.
We can hear you great.
Thanks. I'm also wanting to comment on the agenda item concerning the felony firearms issue. Carol Seaman's policy statement starts out, "This policy is one of a series of reforms that address mass incarceration and racial equity to promote justice and fairness in charging decisions and equitable results in sentencing." It's important to, have that perspective in mind of why she has done this, and that she worked with the Vera Institute for Justice to compile a great deal of data over about a year and a half from her office about what charges are making the most difference in inequitable outcomes in terms of racial disparities. And she wanted to try to really look and see which ones would matter. Just the way you all looked, when you wanted to look at what issues of East Lansing ordinances mattered to you, you started with disorderly conduct because you thought that was important in this community. You looked at it very carefully. So she was looking at this from a racial equity lens. And it's one of several policy changes she's made from that perspective. I am very supportive of the policy changes that she has announced, and I notice that all of them are quite nuanced. They are not a statement from the Ingham County Prosecutor that I'm going to ignore the state of Michigan laws. That's not what these policy statements do. I'm not going to make the case for that because that would take a long time, but the packet that you all have is really quite excellent. So there's already a lot of information about this particular charge in that packet. So it strikes me to kind of take a different perspective on the question while we're here in the City Council meeting, which is it strikes me that the policy of Carol Seaman is consonant with the East Lansing City Council policy adopted in November 2020, declaring racism a public health crisis in East Lansing. And I want to quote just a couple of very short phrases from that resolution for our city. Whereas racism and social inequities causes persistent discrimination and disparate outcomes in many areas of life, including criminal justice, therefore be it resolved that the City of East Lansing will do the following: promote equity through all policies approved by the East Lansing City Council, conduct an annual review of the declarations and commitments listed in this resolution on racism as a public health crisis across the various government bodies. That's from like 14 points in that, and after like 10 whereases. But these are the ones that are really relevant. Promote equity in all policies approved by the council, and conduct an annual review of those to see how you're doing, and how to continue to further working against racism in our community. So it seems to me that since this issue of prosecutions is on your agenda tonight, it's an opportunity to begin to consider how the City Council of East Lansing can work to implement your policy about improving racial equity regarding prosecutions that you all have jurisdiction over, and that you're coming from a similar perspective as Carol Seaman, but she works at the county level, you all work at the city level. So I have just a couple of quick suggestions in my 1 minute. Number one, you may be changing your prosecutor soon. We don't know, but that's a possibility. So before this one leaves, ask for information about the charges that have been prosecuted and the race of people who've been prosecuted by charge. Number two, you're going to be interviewing people for that position. Talk to them about the need of that you have for data in the future about charges and racial identity of people who are charged. Number three, what happened with the
30
guidance?
seconds remaining.
Thank you. What happened with the guidance like 2 years ago from the City Council about changing fees and fines when the prosecutor was working with plea bargains or whatever roles? What has happened with that? Has it made a difference? What has been the impact of the ELPD policy about traffic stops? There was a new policy in July 2020. What data do we have about that? Has that made a difference in terms of racial disparities in traffic stops? And lastly, I mentioned that you did a lot of work on disorderly conduct. Obstructing justice charges is a bigger number of charges than disorderly conduct, and they are more disproportionately
I'm going to have to stop you, Chris.
against
just in-
African Americans. So looking at
fairness.
that particular charge, I would commend. you.
And I will mention too that since we do have a time limit here, if anyone runs out of time for what they need to communicate to us, please email us at the council address so that it becomes part of our discussion.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Root. All right. The next comment I have is from Alice Trigger on the Valley Court topic. Alice, are you with us?
Good evening, thank you. This is not me as East Lansing Info, this is me as one of the
Near neighbors.
head comrades of the Oakwood Historic Neighborhood. We don't have presidents and vice presidents and other officers. We call each other comrades, and a few of us function as head comrades. Regarding this item, I have not had time to alert the neighborhood, nor has Chris Root, who's the other active head comrade. We've both been pretty busy. So what I wanted to ask you tonight is not to make any decisions about Valley Court, but to actively engage our neighborhood and also the neighborhood called Downtown, which has no organization but could be engaged. I'm especially concerned that you try to engage through mail direct addresses, not only the owners of properties, but the people who live there. So our neighborhood is about 2/3 rental. And it is very important to me as we progress really well with the neighborhood resource specialists, especially with Tanya Williams doing fantastic work with the police department. We're making progress on the issue of living with students as homeowners. And it seems very important to me that we engage this neighborhood and engage the people who live on the south side as well. We're on the north, they're on the south. There are more people on the south at West Village, people who live in a frat down there, the graduate student co-op that we have great relationships with. I want to see us engage not just the property owners, but engage the people who actually live there in the question of what should happen. The park has been progressing beautifully over the last few years. It's really exciting. The change of Evergreen Avenue, although it's mostly weeds, it's an exciting change for the future. So I really want to see people beyond the folks who happen to be connected on my email list get engaged. I know you're considering, as one of the questions, the issue of affordable housing. I would love an update on what's going on with Building C of DRW Convexity. My neighborhood strongly supported affordable housing in that building. My neighborhood sent in a letter with 23 signatures of support for that project, specifically because we were wanting to welcome lower income families into our neighborhood. So we've not seen the construction of that building, and we'd like to know what's going on with that, but we're excited about that building. I don't think there's any question that the vast majority, if not the entire neighborhood, would welcome an art space project or something similar. We not only actively welcome affordable housing projects to our neighborhood, we also have a ton of artists already in our neighborhood who could welcome such people to the neighborhood. We have musicians, we have graphic artists, we have sewists, we have singers. We have so many people in the neighborhood that make sense for a project like that. I know the community center is falling apart. Helping Hands needs a much better space, and more could be done with that. But one thing I wanted to draw your attention to that has been a point of frustration for the neighborhood is the city took away the ramp that allowed us to get to our park. And it wasn't just us, it was people who would come to park to go to the farmer's market or park for whatever reason on Oak Hill or on Marshall to come down to the park. The ramp is gone, and I understand that the ramp didn't meet ADA, but the city made a point when they put in the new section where Valley Court Drive meets parking lot 15, they did a ramp that zigzags so that people could get down from there according to ADA. We lost the ability to take our kids in strollers. We lost the ability to take or to ride ourselves in wheelchairs. We lost the ability to take our bicycles. We lost all of that when we lost that ramp. And now we're forced with little kids and with people who may be vulnerable to have to go all the way around Hillcrest or go all the way around Evergreen just to get to the park, just to get to the farmer's market if somebody needs to use wheels. So I recognize the city is likely to redevelop that property sometime in the future, but I also know from history it takes years and years and years for things to be redeveloped. So I know the neighborhood would strongly ask that you reinstate a ramp for us so that we can get from our neighborhood into our park without dramatic struggle, and so that people who come to park in our neighborhood, which we welcome, we're not a neighborhood that says, please don't park here. We say, come park, that they can get down to Crunchies, that they can get down to our farmers market, that they can get down to play Frisbee in the park. So I think this is an awesome, exciting opportunity. The synergy with the neighborhood research specialist is fantastic right now. We are seeing cultural change in our neighborhood. We are seeing landlords giving up and selling houses when they are not good landlords. There are many good landlords in our neighborhood, but these one-off landlords are often awful. They leave, they don't help, they don't answer our concerns. They are the ones that are the problem. They're selling, and that's a sign to me that the neighborhood is beginning to shift. I think the overbuilding of student housing is ultimately going to impact our neighborhood in positive ways, and we are engaging with our student neighbors in ways we never have before. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I don't want us to make decisions before we engage the people who matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Drager. All right, my next person is Mark Tori on the Chesterfield Hills rental conversions.
Thanks. That's Mark Terry.
Terry, excellent.
That's all right. Yeah, I've been engaged for about 10 of the last 20 years in the license transfer project that we started at Chesterfield Hills. And I was very disappointed, I guess, to read the memo that said that we had a confidential legal opinion that says they're not able to do that. What does that mean? It's also a little disappointing to come to this forum, which is supposed to be like a work session, or at least that's what it used to be. This is the time we would be able to discuss back and forth when we're talking about the subject, instead of blindly offloading what might be the concerns and then having to go home and wait to see if you guys got it. I mean, that's just not transparent. I understand you've got time issues, but that doesn't matter. You know, we're trying to make a decision, an informed decision, and a good one. I don't think anybody knows more about this project than I do, because I was involved from the very beginning. And, you know, we actually, to tee this thing up, to make it easy to do for the city, we actually talked the landlord into buying back a house, $400,000 that he had sold before because it wasn't a good performer. He did that so that we could then pose that, and that particular landlord also had receiver properties, 3 of which were in our neighborhood association. We raised no objection to make it work, just so we could try it. Stone wall. We had an opinion from Dennis McGinty back in 1999 that said, sure, you can do this. This is a good idea, and here's how you should do it. License transfer for non-conforming properties. And basically, all license transfer is commoditization of a license. You're putting a price tag on it. Let's say $50,000. So if we would have been able to do that, we would have taken that $300,000, bought that house, rehabbed it, got $300,000 back from the developer, and had $300,000 in the bank with a brand new house in the heart of our neighborhood. Where's the loss there? Where's the problem there? Shanna, where's the problem there? And incidentally, if we would have put that into effect back then, the city could have $20 million in the bank right now that they don't have. Because the city, when the developer, I forget what the zoning is for these tall buildings, but it's either 8 or 10. Everything went through, and all of a sudden the guy comes back and says, oh, geez, I need 2 more floors. What am I going to do? And as usual, the council caved, gave him 2 more floors. If you do the math on that, each one of those floors is worth $10 million additional sales price to the developer. So you gave the developer $20 million. That caused you to have to buy more fire equipment. I don't know where the hell you got the money for that, or even if you can put a fire out on the 12th floor right now. Can you? But anyway, you gave that $20 million to him for nothing. That essentially would have been 2 floors of non-conforming licenses. You could have charged for them. At $50,000 a head, you'd have made $10 to $20 million. What's the holdup, and what's so confidential about a memo, a legal opinion? What is there in a legal opinion that I can't see? What is it? I want to, come on. What is it?
Well, we are going to discuss that item, and so I imagine all of those
Let's
things
bring
will
up that
come
question, because I want to see that memo redacted or whatever it is, because I want to see the logic. I have an opinion from the city attorney from 20 years ago that said, yeah, you can go ahead and do it, it's a good idea.
Were
if
the
you do it
rental
this way.
overlays that are in existence right now in existence during that opinion?
I'm sorry?
Were the rental overlays in East Lansing that are in existence now in existence when that opinion was written?
Not sure, but rental overlays don't exist in every area of the city. So that, I mean, that really doesn't matter. Also, rental overlays were pretty close to being outlawed anyway. So, I mean, it's not, it's
Well,
not
if
like
that
that's-
changes, then we'll have a lot more options
It's
for a
not
lot
like,
more
it's not like
things.
that's sacred ground.
So would you like to use your last 53 seconds? Or would you like me to talk about the legal opinion?
I'd like to see the legal opinion. I'd like to
So-
see an unredacted copy of the legal opinion. And I'll take to the rest of my, well, never mind, just good enough. I said,
All right.
this is not the way, in my opinion, this is not the way public comments should be taken, especially in a work session. I know it causes a problem for you, but this is when we're supposed to have a back and forth. I mean, this is a blind shot from me and then cross my fingers, hope I hit the target. That's silly. And again, nobody knows more about this subject than I do because I did it for 10 years, 10 of the last 20. I gave up the last 10. Thank you.
So in regards to our communication with our legal team, what we have had some discussion on is the fact that all communication from our attorneys is subject to attorney-client privilege unless this body as a body agrees that it is available for public comment. So the default is that it is private until we say that it should not be private. I have absolutely no problem releasing that memo. If we can get support from the rest of council, then we can have that published and ready for viewing.
Whose attorney is that? Why is it confidential to you five?
We could have the opinion of, we could have opinion written on that, and then we could vote to make it public so that you could have access to that. George, do you
Yeah,
want
so
to?
the city attorney's advisor to council, and so council as a body has to be the one. So one council member can't give the opinion. The body has to act to make the opinion public. That's all it takes.
My point is, the city attorney is, unless they're looking into something confidential, whatever they give to you, they should be able to give to me.
That's your opinion, but they are the advisor to
I think
council.
that's probably an opinion that's held by a lot
Okay.
of other people, too. It's not a personnel issue, George.
Yep. That's the opinion of the city attorney, so you have a different opinion, but thank
All
you.
right. Well, I have no problem, I guess we can talk about this when we get down to the agenda item, but I've got no problem releasing that opinion, and we can get the support of the rest of council when we come to that item. All right. Diane Wing, also about rental conversions. Hi, Diane. How are you?
Everyone, Diane Wing, 1024 Huntington Road, which is in the Chesterfield Hills Historic District. Before I get started, there's one little nitty-nat detail that keeps popping up in all of the presentations, and that's the inclusion of 325 and 327 Chesterfield Parkway in the list of Class 3 and Class 4 rentals. While that is a Class 4 rental, it's not included in the contract that was developed with the developer however many years ago. That is not a residence that's included as part of a conversion plan. And the fact that it keeps appearing there concerns me that perhaps staff doesn't understand the contents of the contract. If you want to list that property as a rental for licensed unit, sure, but then put an asterisk next to it and say it's not part of this contract. And the reason for that is that 325 Chesterfield Parkway is a standalone single-family home, and 327 is a standalone, call it an accessory dwelling unit in the back of that home. Both of those properties are parceled together in BSNA and they're sold together. So you can't buy the rental portion without buying the home. Okay, that's just like some little background. I agree with Mr. Terry. He does know more about this subject than anybody else. Certainly, there's no institutional history left here at the City of East Lansing about this subject. Mr. Terry has been working on it for a long time, so has Ben Fedewa, another member of the Chesterfield Hills neighborhood. The other item that Mr. Terry spoke about was the confidentiality of this legal opinion. This legal opinion absolutely impacts Chesterfield Hills. It probably impacts other neighborhoods as well, but we don't know that unless we can actually read that memo. It is a slap in the face to feel as though a memo that directly relates to $300,000, which is earmarked for Chesterfield Hills, that the residents of Chesterfield Hills, just even us, we can't even look at it to see why that license rental, the license transfer was deemed not doable. Okay, so as part of the item, the agenda packet item, quote, "The City of East Lansing and/or its designated agents shall use the developer payment as a revolving fund to acquire, rehabilitate, and deed restrict remaining Class 3 and 4 rental properties in the neighborhood." From my reading of what's being presented tonight, and maybe it's in there, and maybe it just has to be explained verbally, I can't see any of those options that are going to turn the $300,000 into more money. All of those options appear that we will use the money, we will eat it up on 1 or 2 rentals, and then the $300,000 is gone. We've then squandered the opportunity to make money off of this particular item. Again, I may be proven wrong. Just reading the presentation, I couldn't discern that. Also concerned that it seems that we went into a black hole with the city. On March 12th of 2021, there was a Zoom meeting with myself, Mr. Terry, Brandon Scott, and Ben Fedewa. All 4 of us have been working on this issue for a variety of different years, with Mr. Fehrenbach, Ms. Irwin, and Mr. Van Fossen. So we met on the 12th. March 23rd was the presentation to council. As of March 26th, Ben Fedewa sent an email with a huge amount of detail as far as ideas about how we move forward. To my knowledge, Mr. Fedewa never got a response from the city. On March 24th, Mr. Terry sent an email, again with all of the background from Dennis McGinty, from all of the work that was done as part of the Non-Conforming Properties Committee, no response back. March 26th, another email from Mr. Fedewa. To my knowledge, no response back from the city. On May 13th, Mr. Terry wrote again asking, is there anything we can do to follow up? I asked verbally Mr. Fehrenbach sometime in the June or July timeframe, what's going on? Can we help? We're willing to sit down and give you more of our information. No, we weren't needed. So we didn't even know, I didn't even know this item was coming back on until I just happened to read that, oh, it's on the agenda. Now, Ms. Irwin did send us an email. That was very nice of her, but it was yesterday. So it's been like this radio silence about an item that all 4 of our residents have a wealth
30
of
seconds
information on.
remaining.
Thank you. As well as the fact that it feels as though our ideas are literally just being ignored. I know the presentation says that that's the next step is to work with the Chesterfield Hills neighborhood, but well, I'm not sure if that's going to happen, and honestly, it should have happened before now. Because again, I don't believe that the concepts that are being presented tonight are going to make the best use of this money, of the $300,000. Thank you.
Before you step away, Ms. Wing, I do not recall seeing any of those emails, and I just searched my email for those 2 last names, and I did not get anything. Can you confirm what addresses those were sent to?
They were going to staff, so
Okay.
it would have either been Mr. Fehrenbach, Mr. Irwin, Ms. Irwin, or both.
Okay.
So to my
And
knowledge, they never went to council.
I just also want to point out that this is a discussion meeting. This is no action is being taken, and that, in the commitment to transparency, which comes up so very frequently, a public meeting is really the best place to start that discussion. So you haven't received communication. We are talking about it now in public. It is the beginning of that conversation. So nothing has happened and nothing is happening.
With all due respect, though, the conversation's been going on for years,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Through other council members, through different iterations.
Fair, yes. So just
Thank you.
to okay. Well, I have not been privileged to see those, so I cannot speak to the whether or not a response was given. All right, Emily, do we have anybody for virtual comment?
We have one caller on the line. So caller with the phone number ending in 145, you are now permitted to address council. Caller with the phone number ending in 145, you are now on with the city council. Can you pause the...
All right. Final invitation for in-person comment. If anyone who has not filled out a blue card, go ahead and come to the podium. Please fill out a blue card with your name so that we can add you to our public comment record.
Should I speak first?
Yep, go ahead. Just no need. Just leave it up at the podium after you're done. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Roper, and I live at 500 Butterfield Drive. And I'm here tonight. I apologize for being late. So this topic probably already came up, but I really wanted to raise the issue of basement flooding. But I want to raise it in a broader context. I want to raise it in the context of, the overall infrastructure in the city of East Lansing and some of the, concerns that I have as a person who works on water infrastructure in my professional capacity, but I'm also, like a resident of the community and have really more focused on state and national infrastructure issues, but as my neighbors and myself have been impacted by basement flooding very much over the past, and increasingly over the past, few years. I'm taking care of my issue, and it's going to cost a fair amount of money to deal with, but I'm doing that because it's what I need to do. But I'm concerned about, other people who don't even know what they can do to protect themselves and to address the issues in their home. And I'm concerned about, again, decisions that were made in the past that we're now paying the price for as a community. The city of East Lansing doesn't have a separate stormwater and sewer. A lot of people don't even know that. There's a lot of questions that I have been fielding from residents who fully do not understand what is happening. Now, I don't have all of the answers because I don't literally know what the city's infrastructure plan is and what the asset management plan. I know, Shanna, you know all about asset management planning, but I don't know what has happened and where we are. So having some kind of community forum meeting, this is not DPW's fault. I want to be really clear. This is not DPW's fault. So that's not what this is about. This is really about understanding and then helping inform the community to make the best choices moving forward as we are, investing money in the community's infrastructure. So I also wanted to raise in my remaining few seconds or minute here that the City of East Lansing is part of the Consumers Energy gas service area. And as some of you know, the Consumers Energy Integrated Resource Plan is currently up for review, public comment, et cetera. And it's my hope that the City of East Lansing will weigh in as we think about the future of our fossil future and what we want to see in the Consumers Energy IRP. So I wanted to raise that here. In the past, the City Council has signed on to letters that have gone to the docket on DTE, but now is the chance to weigh in on the Consumers Energy Integrated Resource Plan. So it would be helpful for me to know who would be the best person to talk to about how to move forward and being able to put comments in on that Consumers Energy Integrated Resource Plan.
George, can we have someone follow up with her about that?
Our Public Works Director is here and can follow up with the council as well.
Okay, I'll get out of
Our
it.
DPW director is right here, so she is a good person for you to start with.
Yep. Okay, well, we'll do that, but I'm also hoping that, again, sometimes, I don't know the situation here, but sometimes staff is really bound by policies and decisions and vision that maybe city council has as to where this community wants to go around issues like fossil fuels. And so I'm very happy to talk to staff, but I'm also hoping to be able to engage with council members and talking about, that issue and where we are in this time.
And Mr. Roper, I would also suggest that you make a connection with the city's environmental commission, because they have a pretty, and now they're making some updates or just made some updates to our climate action plan. They do have an energy subcommittee. Generally speaking, they're going to do some of those, and they would bubble that up to us. I think they're excellent suggestions, but if they're not already engaged, I'd be surprised. And
Okay.
I'm sure they would love to get some of your expertise on
Yeah,
that too.
well, and I serve on the commission.
Oh, you do?
The
Okay.
Commission on the Environment, and
Okay.
so,
Sorry, I didn't realize that. I'm a little out of.
yeah, wonderful group, the Commission on the Environment, and, again, I'm just trying to feel my way around to
Yeah.
figure out how far, our leaders in this community are willing to go on some of those concerns.
Yeah, sure.
So-
And I think, all of our boards and commissions can bring recommendations to council, whether sort of formally or through different means. So you can work with your staff liaison on that, or if you have questions,
Okay.
you can certainly ask any of us, but that's a process that can happen.
All right, thank you very much for your time.
And I'm an email away. I'm happy to meet with anybody to set up a time. So just go ahead and shoot me an email and I will set up a time with you.
Great.
And I'm sure that the same is true of other council members.
Excellent.
So
All right,
I'm
thank you all.
committing them to such. All right, final call for public comment. Looks good. All right. Council members, anyone have anything they want to bring up tonight? Babcock.
Thank you.
Yep.
First off, I learned something at our last council meeting. I made a reference to EMTs, and I learned from our acting fire chief that we don't have EMTs. City of East Lansing has paramedics who are much more highly trained, and everyone in that department is both a firefighter and a paramedic. So if you get picked up by an East Lansing ambulance, you are in really superb, well-qualified hands, and you get two of them. That's something that most of us don't think about until you're really in a desperate situation, and this is as good as it gets, and we overlook sometimes just how fortunate we are in this community. So I'm proud to have learned that. Tonight, I learned from Dr. Drager about the ramp. As you know, accessibility is extremely important to me, and while I understand removing the ramp because it wasn't accessible may have been a wise choice, the idea isn't just to take away the ramp, it's to change our infrastructure so it isn't accessible to all. So I would respectfully ask the city manager what our plan is to reinstall a ramp that allows strollers, wheelchairs, and any other form of mobility.
We can certainly look at that as a part of the Valley Court plan and discussion that's coming up. There isn't a plan at this point, but we can certainly look at that.
Okay. And then last night, I took a walk down North Lawn and some of the other streets around Robert Shaw Park in Glencairn, and I heard consistently that people have never had this kind of flooding before. And I'm not an engineer. I like to think that for a non-engineer, I enjoy a good infrastructure project probably more than most people, but it was really hard not to look at the sewer project that's going on and draw a correlation between the houses that had up to 8 feet of water in their basement. Again, I don't know, and part of the reason why they're redoing that is because the infrastructure there is aged and needs to be redone. But it is true that the drains are up higher than the street, and water, like electricity, seeks the lowest point to move, so that would be a recipe for disaster. We are in a fortunate community. We're in a forward-thinking community. We have a major engineering department across the street, and this is an issue that, as Ms. Roper said, we really need to address. I don't know where we start. I think Commission on the Environment is a great place to start, but it's certainly not the only one. And people are really suffering. I mean, when you have 8 feet of water in your basement and your house is condemned, and that's just devastating. I'm not blaming DPW at all, but we've put people on the moon. We can do this. East Lansing can do better. I'll do all I can to help. So that's it. Thank you.
Shanna, got anything for us tonight?
Sure, I'll just echo that I'm glad to hear some of the folks from Glencairn. I don't think this is, right now there is a very much of a focus on the construction in Glencairn and the flooding, but I think that Ms. Roper's comments are very appropriate. We've had flooding in various parts of the city in the last few years, and I think those of us who work in this field know that this is only increasing, and that if we don't get serious about dealing with climate change and dealing with resilience in the face of that and adaptation in the face of that, we're going to continue to have costs and local and personal heartbreak on the part of people living here. So I do think at a minimum, I'd love to see council and staff do some kind of engagement with the community sort of on a larger basis about our infrastructure planning. And I think as we get into having conversations about ARP Recovery Act expenditures and some other things, this is going to be very important. And I think there are two parts to that. I think we play a role in making sure that our community members also understand what they can do and what we are doing and how we need to work together and what the risks are of all of those things. So there's a lot of really creative ways. I have a sibling who used to have a consulting firm that was entirely dedicated to community engagement around infrastructure construction. So it's a thing. So I'd love to kind of see us think about what we can do on that front. That's it.
Ron, you got anything for us tonight?
Yeah, a couple things. I'll build off of that. I do agree with the forum perspective. I think people are listening. I think it needs to be people from environmental sector, engineers, smart people from across the street, just a lot of stuff. It's just time to consider what if this isn't going to change, regardless of how the drains are structured. Rains are not going to get better. They're going to get worse, and everything around the environment. And as we consider ARPA dollars or building or any type of infrastructure, everything, once again, needs to be considered through the prism of it's going to be worse, not better. So I'm open to the forum suggestion from the audience, hearing from multiple sectors on this issue and convening and getting some solutions from outside of this, and even to the current situation outside of even, like everyone's saying, no offense to Works or anyone else, but yeah, I think it is a little more than coincidental with the flooding in certain areas of the city, if that can't be denied, and something needs to be considered in that area. Second, on the question of food trucks, I mean, what way to make a huge issue out of something that could have been small. I think just as a city, sometime when we govern and do things, we govern to the lowest instincts, sometimes those of students or other people, and it becomes kind of parental. And I think this is one of those situations. I don't think this was really necessary to work from this perspective and put the lowest bar, and I kind of expressed that in the meeting, and that's exactly what it turned into. I think we need to always find a way to start with yes, then establish the rules and show people how to work within our rules. We tend to just put a low parameter and then work our way backwards. It's a weird way to operate on really simple things along those lines. What else we got going on here? And yeah, so just to my neighborhood in Hawks Nest and the number of messages that I've got, yeah, I think we should address this a little bit quicker rather than later, and worry about what the students are going to do later, or whoever we were trying to regulate in a different way, or inside of downtown or whatever. There seem to be two separate issues, and we might want to revisit that sooner rather than later. That was all.
Thanks. Dana, you got anything for us tonight?
Yeah, just to add to the comments on flooding, I've thought about things like it would be nice for us to have an overview of what's happening with the flooding, because we have our homeowners, we have sewage backups for some people, and we also have our renters who, especially the ones who live on the ground floors, who are really impacted. And so just understanding the different compartments that the flooding can fall into, like does it have to do with construction? Is there something groups can do to be proactive? But it would be nice to have a conversation and also really have a full picture of what's happening with the flooding for anyone who has the flooding going on for them. My next comment is the remark about Building C. I remember when I was on Planning Commission and we talked about Building C, and it would be great if we could get an update on Building C as well, please. And the last is the Senior Commission wrote in to us about Newman Lofts and their pickup spots. And they were kind enough to also give us a direct idea on where they think people can get picked up at. And I am asking if we can follow up on that, and if that is not an option for them, if we can offer them a few other options that they can have. It is dangerous and it can be scary when you're waiting on your Uber or your Lyft to come pick you up from a dark area or from a slippery area, and that is what's going on for those folks there. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't want to let this moment pass without talking a little bit about flooding. We truly have had some terrible incidents. But I also don't want to create some sort of perception that we can solve this just by putting bigger sewers under our streets. The amount of water that we are talking about in very short periods of time is truly monumental. And it is increasing in frequency, which is one of the reasons that we're seeing an increase in these incidents. So whatever the solution might be is going to be a multi-pronged approach, and some of it is unfortunately probably going to fall to homeowners in terms of drainage on their own properties. So I do think that it's good for us to talk about it. I think it's good to talk about all of the different possible solutions that might be part of doing this. But I also am truly, I feel very sorry for Director McPherson. I think it's been raining since you have stepped up into this position. I definitely don't want to create some impression that we can just solve this by putting in bigger culverts, because we really cannot. We're talking about a truly catastrophic quantity of water. But I think that, you know, having anybody who might have any feedback on any solution in to talk to us about what that might be would be great. Ms. Wing, you're raising your hand.
I know I'm not supposed to interrupt. I can't believe it hasn't been mentioned here, backflow valves. And maybe Ms. McPherson can talk about it.
Actually came up in a conversation earlier today.
Backflow valves. Everybody who's been flooded, you should have a backflow valve in your main sewer drain. If you've never been flooded, you should have a backflow valve in your sewer drain. That's going to shove the water back out. You'll probably have sewage, geysers in the middle of the street, but you won't have the sewage geyser in your basement.
So all possible strategies should be on the table so that everyone knows the full access of tools at their disposal. And I am going to also reiterate that some of those are going to have to happen on private property, which is just the unfortunate fact. So I also want to talk about food trucks. So there has been just a massive misunderstanding about what we did last week in terms of food trucks. Hawk Nest seems to see this as a direct enforcement action against their neighborhood gatherings, which in my mind, that was never even part of the conversation. Did we even know that Hawk Nest was having food truck rallies?
Yeah, this was envisioned as a loosening of the requirements because neighborhoods requested food trucks that were not allowed. So this was a loosening. No one knew Hawk's Nest was having
no one had
de
any
facto
idea
food truck
that
rallies.
Hawk Nest was having
this
food
was all
trucks
news to
into their
us.
neighborhood, and this had absolutely nothing to do with this. The first time I talked to somebody about food trucks in a neighborhood was a Glen Cairn resident who approached us asking how they would be able to do this in their neighborhood. And in reviewing our policies, we realized that under current city policy, it was just illegal because we didn't have any sort of concessionaire's license. Now, a private homeowner has always been able to hire a caterer in any format that they want, including somebody that comes in a truck. But that was a private interaction between an individual homeowner and whomever they wanted to serve food at their party. It was not a food truck coming into a neighborhood to directly sell to residents, which is apparently what has been happening in Hawk Nest, but also on private property. It's been happening on a lot that is not a city lot. So I don't know where that falls, and I don't know what their options are for continuing. But what this was an attempt by us to make that possible in town. We want everyone to experience what has apparently been happening in Hawk Nest. So I would like to reframe the conversation with your neighborhood, Ms. Hill, and ask you instead for your feedback about how this has been working so that we can consider that and make a policy that works citywide. Because apparently you have more experience with it than we do and have been greatly enjoying it. So can we rewind, stop, assuming that this was some sort of negative impulse by us to control you, which it certainly was not, and get the benefit of your experience as we move forward so that we can bring this forward citywide? Can we do that? Excellent.
And I would just like to ask that before things are put into ordinances where it becomes final and firm, those conversations can take place before that occurs. We're probably all better off.
So, and I'm going to say something that's probably going to get me some glares. I do understand the benefit of community feedback, but if we always try to talk to everyone before we do anything, we end up doing nothing. So what we have now on the table is an imperfect ordinance, which is definitely needing some tweaking, but we have a place to start from. So, and we have an opportunity for other neighborhoods to enjoy 1 or 2 food trucks a year in their neighborhoods right now. And we can go forward and talk on top of that and improve it. And I'm very much, hoping that we can get your feedback on that. But I actually think that doing something to start is better than waiting until everyone is in agreement. And that is probably not a very East Lansing thing to say, because that is not really how we work, but that's just my opinion. So I feel like I've got some other things to say, but food trucks and flooding have pretty much consumed my whole mind right now. So I'm just gonna let that go. And if it was important, it'll come up next week. All right, City Manager, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things, and that was really, you hit it on the nail on the head. This was a request from Abbott Parkside and the Glencairn neighborhood to have food trucks at their fall meetings, and we tried to rush to put something in place to make that permissible. So that was the intent of it, was to open it up, to be able to let the neighborhoods have their fall events and benefit from food trucks. That was the impetus of that. Yeah. So to talk about flooding, obviously it's a terribly disruptive thing for people, and it is. I've lived in East Lansing and I've had 2 floodings in my own house, so I understand that. The City of East Lansing has a very good resource on our webpage on Public Works. It's a detailed brochure on basement flooding, what to do, the steps, lots of good advice, including backflow preventers and the installation of them, the use and all of that. So I would encourage people to look at that resource. It also directs people, if they have flooding, to call the Public Works Department to make certain where that resulting water is coming from. Is it a private issue or a public issue? So there are lots of good resources here. We've also talked internally about the use of potentially coming back to council with ARPA funds discussions and looking at the issue of providing some level of assistance where possible. We have to look at that first for backflow prevention installation. Backflow preventers don't take care of all of these problems because the backflow is simply stops the combined sewer or the sewer water from backing up into the house, which is very disruptive, but it does not stop the infiltration of water from the foundation, from under the foundation, from in through windows. So there could be you could do this and have a different problem, but that gets to all the resources of grading, foundation repair, and all of the eaves trough maintenance and all of that. So there's much to this, but also it would be useful to have Interim Director McPherson come and perhaps do a presentation. The council may not all know that there was purposeful discussions 30 years ago probably about continuing on with the combined sewer to using the tunnel that goes under Grand River, the retention basin, all of these things that were considerations of continuing a combined sewer rather than separating them out. The old part of the city has combined sewer. The new parts of the city have separate sanitary and storm sewers. So there's a combined system here in East Lansing. But those were purposeful decisions made 30 years ago. We dug the tunnel in 1990 something. So that was the direction from that. It's not an easy direction to change, but it's something we certainly can talk about. But a lot of information that we can share with council in that direction about the sort of policy directions of sewers, which is, costly and difficult infrastructure. So direct people to those resources. Anything I should add on that?
No, I think you have it.
Okay. So more discussion to follow.
Excellent.
I wanted to tell people about a very nice event that we will be holding in East Lansing in conjunction with the MLK Commission, the schools, and the City of East Lansing. Civil rights leader Robert L. Greene will be recognized and will be in the community on September 24th, coming at 9 a.m. for a dedication of the formerly named Pinecrest School to be renamed in his honor, which is a very nice honor. There will then be a march from that location to 207 Bessemer in East Lansing at 11:30 for historic marker designation, designating that home, which was the first home purchased by a black man, directly purchased, because my understanding that there may have been homes purchased for someone else, but direct purchase in East Lansing by Mr. Greene, I believe in 1964. So that is a historical event in East Lansing, and there's going to be a marker placed and a nice ceremony that he will be speaking at. So it's a rare treat for East Lansing to have a civil rights leader of his stature coming to the community and helping in that presentation and dedication. So lots of people to thank, our own council member Bacon, Elaine Hardy, and lots of others who helped make that happen, the school district for their work on this as well. So September 24th in the morning, please mark your calendars for that event. Anything I missed on that? Okay. Next item I wanted to mention, under the city charter, I have an obligation before appointing a director to have a consultation with council. It is my intention to promote interim chief Dawn Carson to the position of fire chief for the city of East Lansing. My intention is to promote her effective September 20th, so that would be next Monday. Chief Carson started with the city of East Lansing back in 1994 as a firefighter paramedic. As noted by Councilmember Babcock, all of our firefighters are firefighter/paramedic, and they have both of those credentials. So she's been with us for 27 years. She has a bachelor's degree in sports medicine from CMU, a master's in organizational management from Siena Heights. She completed her EMT at Lansing Community College. She was promoted to lieutenant, the rank of lieutenant, in 2011, promoted to the rank of captain in 2013, and promoted to deputy chief in 2016. She is also a Lansing Metro Team Technical Rescue Team member. So this is not her introduction. She's in the audience and can just give a wave because we know who's here. But I would like to have her, if there's no further, I'll give a chance for council questions, but my intent upon the promotion is to have Chief Carson come back and have a swearing-in ceremony on October 5 at our meeting. So does council have any questions for me regarding this presentation?
Just to say I'm delighted.
And
Small Worldville. She used to work at a hospital where my grandparents were devoted volunteers, so she's doing Hastings, Michigan proud. Congratulations.
And I would also say she will be, upon her appointment, the first female fire chief of the city of East Lansing. So, but we will have a chance for her to make comments and have a formal introduction on October 5. So without any other questions, that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Wonderful. I am going to announce my intention to move forward with the first two items in our agenda and then have a brief recess. We've got those are the only two items that have non-staff, non-council liaisons, so we'll want to get them out of here since they've been very patient sitting through our absolutely entertaining meeting, as always. So we can move on to discussion item number 6.1. It is a discussion meeting. We'll be giving you kind of a general recognition of an enthusiasm if we think this is a good idea. 6.1, Dave Middleman, can you rise and address us, please, about this settlement or bankruptcy?
Good evening, and thank you very much. My name is David Middleman, and I'm part of the team that represents the city in the opioids litigation. I apologize for the late notice. I have no control over the timeline, if you will, but we have a deadline, and it's the end of the week. And it's not a huge issue compared to the total settlement that we hope to achieve in the near term. But there are three reasons I can give you right now to vote on approving the plan with the reorganization for the Mallinckrodt Company. The reorganization proposal is expected to distribute at least $1.2 billion to a national opioids abatement fund that will be distributed throughout the United States. It could be more than 1.2 billion once we get to some of the insurance proceeds that we haven't been able to secure monetization for. 3.4% of that amount will be allocated to governments in Michigan. I can't tell you yet how the state versus the municipalities will be sharing the proceeds, but my early instincts and current instincts are that we're going to be better off than the default plan. So that's a good thing. And third, the most practical reason to vote for this is that should the reorganization not be approved, it's really not a realistic option. The cost associated with litigation and the volume of creditors that may be ahead of the city makes it for a reckless idea. So, any questions?
Seems fairly straightforward. I have no problem going ahead with it. I think if anybody's got any questions, Babcock, is that a hand up? Sorry.
No, I appreciate the wise guidance of Mr. Middleman and council.
Thank you. So you can submit by electronic, just as we did in Purdue, or you can, if by Thursday, contact the Whites Luxembourg law firm. I can help you with that, or walk you through it as I did with Ingham County this afternoon.
Okay.
Could we have action from council for that purpose, to just give direction that we approve the, because we did add it as an item to approve attorney, so it was added as an action
It was
item.
added as an action item. All right, I will move approval of your recommendation to approve the bankruptcy reorganization plan and allow for distribution to the city of East Lansing and the municipality opioids litigation claims. Do I have a second for that? Seconded by Babcock. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think we're good to go. George, do you have everything you need to move forward on that? Thank you for your time, Mr. Middleman, and we do appreciate that you can't control other people's schedules, so I'm glad we had a meeting this week
Thank you. I am
to
too.
address this.
Thank you very much.
All right, and very patiently, our Sheriff Rigglesworth has been waiting to talk to us about felony firearms. Thanks for your patience, Scott, I appreciate it.
You bet. It's nice to see everybody. I know some people on the council, other people I'm seeing for the first time tonight. So I'm Scott Rigglesworth, here to talk to you tonight about the Ingham County Prosecutor's felony firearm policy. I've spent 27 years in the city, 23 as an East Lansing Police Department officer, retiring in 2016 when I became the elected sheriff. I also attended MSU for 4 years, lived in the dorms for 2 years, and then lived at 509 Cornell for 2 years when I went to Michigan State. So my 27 years of experience in East Lansing, I think, allows me to talk educatedly and being informed about not only what I believe to be best for the county as the county sheriff, but specifically what I believe to be best for the city of East Lansing. So why are we here tonight? So a little over a month ago, the Ingham County Prosecutor issued an internal felony firearms prosecution document policy. And basically what that says is only under the most extreme circumstances and only with her or her number two's approval will felony firearms any longer be issued. And the felony firearms statute is very, very simple. When somebody is in the community and commits a felony or felonies while armed, whether they use the firearm or not, they can be charged with felony firearms. And felony firearms in Michigan comes with a 2-year mandatory sentence for first offense, 5-year mandatory sentence for second offense, and 10-year mandatory sentence for third offense. And these sentences have to be served consecutively to the underlying felony or felonies sentence as well. So the reason I'm here tonight is the prosecutor, when she issued this internal policy, and let me state, I try to stay in my lane as the sheriff. I understand I ran for the office of Ingham County Sheriff, not Ingham County Prosecutor. I'm not an attorney, don't want to be the prosecutor. But in this instance, I just can't be quiet because I feel that it endangers the public, this policy. And so what happened was on a Thursday, she notified all law enforcement chiefs in the county that she had drafted this policy and that she was going to institute it the following Tuesday. She did not involve us at all. There's over 300 years of collective service between the Ingham County Police Chiefs in this decision, had no discussion with us whatsoever, and as I understand it, didn't have any discussion with the community about implementing this policy or any potential effects it may have in our community. So we heard about it on a Thursday. It got issued on a Tuesday. First time we got to read it as law enforcement chiefs and the sheriff was the same time the public did. And I'll be honest with you, when I read it for the first time, I had a reaction of, oh my God, what is this going to do to our community? And again, it mentions only under the most extreme circumstances. So she issues it on a Tuesday. On a Wednesday, I call a press conference at the sheriff's office. This has been in the media. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know about it. Many of our local law enforcement leaders expressed our displeasure with this policy, how we disagree with it, and how we believe it is just going to lead to more violence in our county and in our community. That following day, the prosecutor issued a press release, kind of pushing back against our press conference, and then it played in the media for a couple days, and then it kind of died down. So on Wednesday, when I got back to my office, I started thinking, how can I, as the sheriff, engage our community and get our community's input on how they feel about this? I know somebody mentioned, I think the mayor mentioned earlier, we can't talk to everybody all the time and take all that information. So the idea I had was this, and that's why I'm here tonight. What if I, as the sheriff, was to meet with the 16 township elected supervisors, the 5 elected city mayors, and the 2 elected village presidents, sit down with them, me, and the elected official, talk to them about this policy, let them read the policy, answer any questions that they may have about the policy, and gauge their reaction. And during those conversations, I also brought a community message and a community elected leader message that may be a way that those that represent your constituencies, this one happened to be East Lansing, I've met with everybody else. This is my 25th meeting. I've had all 23 meetings already, and then I had 3 circlebacks. I had 3 different municipalities that wanted to do some due diligence or wanted to talk about it publicly, and that's why I'm here tonight. So this is meeting number 25 of 26 on this issue. And while I had these meetings, there was a lot of questions that it got asked of me and my experience in law enforcement and how I feel that this will lead to more gun violence in our community. But the main question that I got asked almost exclusively by everybody that I met with was, what does she mean by only under the most extreme circumstances? And I said, well, I can't answer that. Only she can answer that. But I can tell you what it doesn't mean. And what it doesn't mean is this. And this example is taken right out of the city of East Lansing, and it just happened a couple weeks ago. The city had a young lady that armed herself because she had a beef with another young lady. This happened up on Beach Lawn Court. She drove up to this house, entered the house, began to beat on the young lady, as I understand it, with her firearm. A male tried to intervene to stop the beating. He then got shot at several different times while inside the house. East Lansing police respond, find her, take her into custody, and of course seek warrants for her arrest on the next day after they complete their investigation. They requested felony firearms in this specific case, and it did not get issued. That case did not qualify for an extreme circumstance. So think about that, folks. I don't know what the bar is, but I just told you what the bar isn't. So I met with Mayor Gregg a couple weeks ago, talked about this briefly. It was one of the shortest meetings I had because she suggested that I come speak at this meeting in council, and that's why I'm here tonight. So as I've met with these other elected leaders, again, this is meeting 25 of 26 tonight, 3 circlebacks. There's 23 people that I've met already. The vast majority of people that I've met with about this issue has signed the signature document on the 2-paragraph message that you have in your packet. And that's what I hope that you, after discussion, are willing to do tonight. I will tell you before you even ask, I've met with 23, I've got 21 signatures. 21 signatures of 16 township or 15 township supervisors, 4 city mayors, and 2 village presidents saying, on behalf of their constituency, this is not right for their community. I hope you do the same. Questions?
Ms. Babcock?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Let me start with the example you gave in East Lansing, and I don't know any more about it than what you've told me tonight, but when you sought charges, were you seeking charges for felony?
East Lansing PD did. I didn't see
When
charges.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When East Lansing PD sought charges, were there other felony charges that were sought?
Yes. So to be charged with felony firearms, there has to be an underlying felony or felonies attached to that case.
Yes.
Yes. So she got charged with multiple felonies, and she's still in the Ingham County Jail as we speak.
Okay, well, you can be in the jail for some time for any number of reasons. I mean, I spent my time with many members of your department and in the courts here in Ingham County doing felony defense. So I know the 2 flat very well, and I know the 5 flat very well, which means that it's like a pancake, right? The 2 flat means whatever else you're sentenced to, you get the 2 flat, and then your sentence, or the 5 flat. As it's, instead of being concurrent, serving at the same time, it's stacked like pancakes, just for the general public. Another thought here is that when police go to an incident, they write a report, then they request charges of the prosecuting attorney. They don't decide what the charges are, and I think we can agree that there's very good reason for that we break the powers into sort of a separation of powers so that different perspectives are brought to bear before charges are brought against an individual. And so I guess that would be my question. You certainly have every right, Sheriff, to come out and speak to us about your concerns about this, but I really can't think of another time in my career when I've had even an elected law enforcement officer come in and be so openly critical about a policy decision made by an elected official, particularly an elected official of, shall we say, the same tier and the same entity. I am no fan of guns. I am no fan of guns forwards or backwards. I represented, most memorably, a young man who got stuck with a 2-year flat. He was carrying a gun because he believed he needed it because other people were carrying guns, and you can see how that cycles. However, I am a bigger fan of the separation of powers and the reasons why we have the police do the report and the prosecutor issue the charges and handle them. I am a little surprised by this request, and while I may have concerns about the prosecutor's policy decisions, it does not match my concern about law enforcement coming to us and telling us that we should be critical of the prosecutor's policy positions, an elected prosecutor. Thank you.
Ron?
Yeah, I understand the position, particularly on the gun issue. I don't think issuing a policy that specific without having long conversations with particularly the most affected communities around gun violence from the prosecutor's office was the wisest decision to begin with. Guns really are extenuating. It's to me, similar to alcohol. What turns something, what may have been one thing, into another thing, the same way alcohol does. Having a gun does tend to extenuate or change the dynamic and the power dynamic and what people are willing to do when carrying a gun. I think we all know that. And secondarily, kind of the toothpaste is out of the tube on guns. We had opportunities to regulate some of these things. There's millions of new guns on the street that were never on the street before, prior to I don't even know how many years, but the escalation of guns and probably the amount of guns that people are facing, both civilians and law enforcement, are just off the charts. Whose fault is that? I don't know, but here we are. I think this subject deserves much more conversation, particularly around the affected communities, as well as just a lot of areas. I think this is an oversimplification of a very complex issue around guns. So just to kind of elaborate on my position, I think sometimes the gun does create the crime and does create the courage to commit the crime. And there's some things you do not do unarmed, period. So I think there's more conversation to be had around guns in general and around firearms, and I think those conversations need to be had. I'm not sure on Sheriff Wigglesworth's positions on signing these things and these documents, but I'm open to hearing more and definitely talking more around this issue of firearms and my concerns around it. I do think it's a bigger problem than just changing the rules or the laws at home, and we need to make there needs to be some complementary things that happen around a decision of that magnitude. So,
Can I respond? Is that allowed here? Yep. So, with Councilman Babcock's comments on the three branches of government, I'm glad you brought that up, because at my press conference, and I will continue to say this, in my opinion, she's dabbling in all three branches. We both find ourselves in the executive branch, but she's ignoring legislation on the legislative branch, and she's kind of playing judge on the judicial side because she doesn't like the mandatory sentence that the judge would have to hand down. So that's my opinion on that. Reference Councilmember Bacon's comments on guns. Just keep in mind, this is not a conversation about guns. This is a conversation about people doing bad things in our community with guns or while armed. So just keep that in mind. This felony firearm statute's been in place since 1976, and it really addresses people going out and victimizing our community and choosing to be armed while they do it. And to me, there's really only two reasons why you would choose to be armed if you're going to go commit a felony. One, you're going to use it in the commission, or two, you have it at your disposal if somebody tries to intervene or stop you. And the intervening, stopping people are usually the police.
Babcock.
Thank you. I'm aware of the three branches of government. I also understand that cops have a lot of discretion in the charges they request, and she's not changing the charges that you can request. She's saying that it's the policy of her office what they will and will not prosecute. And I think that's a very important distinction, and I think you understand that distinction.
I do.
Yes. So she is not, and she's certainly not telling judges what sentences they can or cannot issue. She is, again, saying what charges she will and will not prosecute under certain circumstances. I think that's, again, an important distinction, that she is not playing judge and she is not playing cop. She is not going out and seeking to arrest people. They stand at an arm's length to review warrants and to review charges. And I think you understand as well as I do the importance of having that cooling off period and the legal perspective, and that it is as important as the law enforcement perspective, but different and equally considered.
So, thank you. So I just want to clarify that I work at Ingham County Health Department, which is separate from the prosecutor's office and separate from the sheriff. So I'm hearing about this and I'm thinking about racial disparities. And so can you tell me, during the 27 years when it became apparent that there were racial disparities in arrests and charges, what you all did about it?
Well, it became apparent relatively early in my career that there were more people of color going to jail and prison than there weren't. You know, we've been at that table all the while. I said when I met with the elected officials, there are people way smarter than I'll ever be working on the underlying root causes of the disparities and trying to figure out what's causing it to get less people in the system. That's the other thing this policy doesn't do. It doesn't minimize the people going into the system. In my opinion, it just holds them less accountable once they're in the system because she's not charging this offense. So I don't have all those answers. I'll never have all those answers. But it was to answer your question, it was relatively early in my career. But you need to remember that when we take a 911 call and we respond to a home invasion or drug deal in progress, or you name the crime, the race of the victim or the reporter and the suspect are always predetermined. We don't play any role in determining that. We may find it at the time, or we may find it through an investigation. But we don't get to go backwards necessarily and figure out why that person happens to be in this predicament in their life or not. We don't get to do that.
Yeah, but you all do choose sometimes not to charge or to charge or how many charges. And there is racial disparities in how that's divvied out. And they talk about the police and cops. It starts with you all, with the charges and someone being taken to jail or not being taken to jail or let go of. And so I'm just asking for what role you all are playing in systematic changes due to the racial disparities that we've seen in the data, finally can see in the data. The proof is out there that this is happening.
So I guess I would disagree with you a little bit, Councilwoman Watson, that it starts with us. It starts with the victims. Okay, we respond and we deal with the victims. They let us know what happened, and then we deal with it accordingly from there, okay? As far as the racial disparities, you know, the prosecutor points to the Safe and Just Michigan study that she based her policy off of, specifically just that study, and I don't doubt the numbers. I think the numbers say that 90% of people serving time out of Ingham County for felony firearms in 2018 were black men. I have no reason to doubt those numbers. I'm sure they're true. But you need to remember also that these are people that have been convicted in a court of law or pled guilty in a court of law to this crime or crimes. These aren't people that are accused. They're not suspects. They're not alleged to have had happen. These are people that are in prison for these crimes. And no doubt there's a million different reasons why they are where they are in their lives and why they were at the time they committed this crime or crimes. I don't have all those answers. When we sit as law enforcement, we sit at a lot of those tables. But again, there's going to be people out there that are way smarter than I'll ever be, or most law enforcement officers will ever be, to fix or right those wrongs. But to turn a blind eye on this charge specifically after it's happened as a way to fix those inequities, it makes literally no sense to me. And I've had, there's been 2 homicides in this county since this policy was enacted at the prosecutor's office. Both victims were black. There's been numerous shootings where the victims were black. And my lens in this, there's been some talk about lens tonight. My lens in this is on the victim side. There's been a lot of talk about the suspect or the offender side, but we also have to focus on the victims of these crimes. And maybe the victim is society. Maybe nobody's been victimized yet, but we catch somebody in the act and we take a gun off them while they're breaking into a house, or we take a gun off them while they're doing a drug deal or whatever. Maybe holding that person criminally accountable saves the next shooting or save the next homicide. I think I have 27 people in my jail right now accused of homicide, awaiting trial for homicide. I'd love for that number to be 0 or 5 or 10, but it's 27. And we are in the middle of a gun violence crisis in this community. We just are. And the timing of this policy, I think this policy is foolish anytime, but I certainly think in the middle of a gun crisis, not only here in Ingham County, but statewide and across the country, emboldens people to think that carrying guns illegally or carrying illegal guns doesn't matter and isn't going to be dealt with appropriately. And we've heard that already on traffic stops. We've heard suspects at the time say, nothing's going to happen to me. Prosecutor doesn't care. We're hearing that blowback already. And, you know, we're trying to prevent a lot of this stuff, and part of that prevention piece is to hold people criminally accountable for the offenses that they're committing.
Can I ask a question?
I guess I don't have a problem with that, sure. Please keep it brief.
I haven't read this law or whatever it happens to be,
Mhm.
but I'd like to ask a question. Let's assume that someone is accused of assault and battery. He gets out of a car and beats somebody up. He's got a gun in his car. Can he be sentenced to 2 more years?
It's a misdemeanor. This is
If he does
felony
not,
firearms. It has to be the underlying felony or felony.
Let's make it a felony offense. Let's just change it to
If he had a gun on him at the time, yes. If it was in his car and he was outside the car when he did the offense, likely would not be charged with felony firearms.
If it's on him, even though he doesn't use it.
That's correct. If he doesn't use it in the commission of a crime. Here's the perfect example. Drug dealers almost never use their guns when they're committing their felonies and dealing drugs. They don't stick a gun in your face and say, buy my drugs from me. They have that gun on them in case another drug dealer rolls them or somebody tries to intervene. So I don't need an answer tonight. This was a discussion, but I'd like to meet with the mayor in the next few days or early next week. We can have some further discussion. You guys are going to decide whether you want to join other local leaders in signing this or not. It's up to you. It's not up to me. But I appreciate the time and discussion tonight. And if anybody's got any follow-up questions for me, I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder. So.
Shanna.
So before you sit back down, I have some thoughts I want to share, but I have a couple of specific questions. So you said they only can get charged with this add-on, because I think I'm a little confused by something I read versus what you said, if they are convicted of the underlying felony.
No, if they're charged.
If they're charged, right. So the conviction might not stick for the underlying felony, but they can serve time and be charged.
They could just plead straight up to the 2-year felony firearms and all the underlying felonies could go away. That's correct. That could be a way this is handled.
And when that typically happens, that would be in like a plea agreement, most likely, I'm guessing.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And Shanna, can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
So I actually happened to run into Prosecutor Simon over the weekend, and she said that is something that they are doing, is that they're using it in a plea. Like if somebody wants to plead to the 2-year felony, that is something that her office is still doing. So just, okay.
So that is still happening.
Yes.
Right, and it does talk about that. If it's initiated by the defendant,
You
then
could
they
have
can.
a 10-year felony, a 20-year felony, and then the 2-year
Right,
felony firearms.
right.
And the 10 and 20-year could
Correct.
go away, and you could plead straight up to the
Right,
2.
so in plea agreements, they are still initiating
They're
that.
still using it in plea
So
agreements.
then my other question was, is it automatic? So for a police officer, for police to recommend charges, again, I understand that you're recommending the charges, her office is deciding on the charges, but is an automatic recommendation of a felony firearm charge if, when you make the arrest, someone has a firearm on them, or is that, does that vary?
It's not automatic, but it's very likely that if you commit a felony and you're armed with a firearm, whether you used it or not at the time, that we will request charges for felony firearms, and then it's the prosecutor's decision to say yay or nay.
So
Go ahead.
do you want to go? Do you have questions?
Yeah, but I can.
Do questions, because I'm just going to give comments.
Okay.
Now, just kind of to build off what Mayor Pro Tem Watson was talking about, I think here's where I picture the disparity part comes in on if the initial charge. Obviously, the individual was charged with a felony. A lot of people carry weapons now, and they're not out with the intent of doing felonies when they start their night. This person's carrying a firearm, they're intoxicated, their night escalates, now they're tough, and everything else escalates from there. I don't think every single person's facing a guy as a drug dealer or any of these other things when they started their day. I'm sure there's a bunch of people who became felons. Now, I think where the disparity would happen, if do I have this correct, if I have the attorneys and the ability to reduce the initial charge, do both charges go away? If I'm no longer carrying the felony charge on the front end, and now it's a misdemeanor of disturbing the peace or something like that on the initial,
There's all kinds of ways to resolve this in court.
Well,
and some of those ways may be misdemeanors.
I got it, but specifically I'm trying to get into the mind of the prosecutor a little bit here. This is probably where the felony the individual, even what was just described, where the individual takes the plea on the 2-year felony, is probably an individual with a crappy lawyer. And that's kind of where the disparities begin in that part of the process. And I understand you're where I'm coming from a little bit. And then if I'm well represented and I can make the initial charge go away, does my secondary charge now, it doesn't apply if it's a front end's not a felony anymore? Is that correct from a legal mind?
Yeah, you wouldn't be convicted of felony firearms unless there was some nexus that a felony occurred.
So I think that's where there's the rub. That's where the disparity happens. If I can beat the first charge with proper representation and with whatever else, regardless of intent or what I was doing having the firearm, then the second charge is gone. I think that's right there where the two people diverge. And the
scenarios are endless, for sure.
Yeah, but I'm saying pretty typically, I'm being devil's advocate a little bit here. The person who has less representation is not getting out of that initial charge, or they're going to cop or to the secondary charge to eliminate the first felony thing, which someone with better representation, if it was even marginal, beats that first charge, correct?
Could be. This charge historically has been charged between 150 and 200 times a year over the last 5 or 6 years. So it's not getting charged thousands of times.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, a lot of times there's victims involved in this.
Yeah.
So it's a serious crime where somebody gets robbed at gunpoint or shot or gets murdered. And a felony firearms charge would be tacked on to the murder charge. So these aren't your run-of-the-mill stealing a candy bar and you're armed and we figured out, we saw your gun on your waistband. That these are serious offenses where typically this felony firearms charge, and the example I gave you that happened in East Lansing would be a serious offense where, for whatever reason, it wasn't applied in that case.
You good, Dana? Okay. Dana's got a question.
Oh,
Dana, did
yeah,
you want to do? Go ahead, Dana.
Okay. So
Councilmember Watson, sorry,
thank you.
I'm very informal.
It's totally right. I wanted to revisit the role that you all play when you put on your racial equity lens and you see the data and you see that more Black and brown people, that there's a disparity. What role do you all play in that, and how can you fix it?
Well, when it comes to the criminal justice system, and there's a victim involved in the case, that we don't necessarily. I mean, we have to investigate the case and then submit charges if the victim wants to prosecute. If we interrupt a drug deal and both men are carrying guns and they're dealing drugs back and forth and one's white and one's black, we're going to send up charges on both of them.
Yeah, it's like the prosecutor saw a role that could be played by the prosecutors. In our community, we see a role that we can play in systemic racism. And this unrest has come from our relationships with police officers. And you're standing here and there's nothing, there's nothing that you guys are thinking about doing. There's no policy changes that you all are offering up, but you're here because the prosecutor is trying to do something different, because something different needs to be done. We have a problem.
And in my opinion, in my 28 years of law enforcement, this policy is going to increase gun violence in our community.
Shannon, did you want to share your comments?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a couple things. I think I want to start with the process and then talk about the content. On the process side, our county prosecutor is an elected official, and she's come out with this policy, and I think that's within her purview to do that, and I think the voters of this county can respond to that however they see fit. I do think it's within your purview as the county sheriff to speak your mind and share your data and your information on what you see the risks of that being, from a gun violence, from that. I think a forum for educating and having that conversation is a little different than sort of signing on to a policy that some way rebukes another elected official. And I'll just say straight up that I'm not comfortable doing that. I very much respect elected officials' roles in answering to the voters on policy decisions they make, and I think that's what has to play out here. But, you know, I think this is an incredibly complex conversation, and it does need more data. Do I wish there had been a broader conversation maybe before she did it? Sure. Do I want us to still have that conversation as a community? Yes. I think it's very much needed. I think there's context around gun violence, numbers, statistics, data from other sources, although there are several here, not just the one study. So I just say from a process side, I have no issue with you making known you are responsible to your constituents and making that known. I just am not comfortable with us signing on to a rebuke of another public official.
Fair enough. I was asked to come here tonight.
I totally get, well, because you're not, I mean, we're going to give guidance to our mayor, who's going to have that conversation. And I'm just giving my perspective to our mayor to say that's how I feel. As it relates to the content, you know, guns are a major problem. We have gun violence is an epidemic in this country. It's a health crisis. I am a card-carrying member of Everytown for Gun Sense. It is a major issue. But we also have to look honestly at our system. And the data about the racial disparities in our system is incontrovertible. It's in front of us. And we can't tackle that whole thing in one fell swoop. We all have to figure out the ways we are going to begin to tackle that. And mandatory sentencing on policies, there's a whole set of problems with that, in my opinion anyway. But in this particular case, we have a racial disparity in the way these numbers are playing out. And it is incumbent, I think, on us as community members and law enforcement and prosecutors and defenders and defendants and all of us to figure out what's going on with that and try to implement policies to fix that. So there is something going on. There is a racial injustice that is happening in the way that this is done, whether that is when the recommended charges are being made, whether that's recommending charges and what prosecutors are choosing to do, whether that's how good your attorneys are. And it starts economically from the very get-go in terms of why people are involved in crimes in the first place and goes all the way through the system. And so I think it is important for us to be thinking about how we are taking bites, big and small, at this system that is not working from a racial disparity perspective. So I have concerns about gun violence. I share those. I very much appreciate hearing from you on this, but I do think it's important for our community, for our state, to begin tackling this issue.
Before I give my comments, anybody else have anything that they wanted to? I feel sort of responsible for dragging you up here. But I really do appreciate you coming to talk to the whole council. I think the way that East Lansing's election system works is just a little bit different from every place in the county. And since these are the people that kind of selected me to be mayor, actually Aaron did when he quit, but that's okay. I felt that I couldn't represent the opinion of this council without consulting them. And I do actually very much think that this was a very important conversation, and I really appreciate you submitting yourself to some discomfort to bring your perspective to us. I think one thing that I really just try to keep in my mind as we are all doing what we can for this county is that everyone is coming from a place where we really want the best for this community. I think it is, from your comments, we can tell that it is critically important for you to keep this community as safe as possible. I think we are undertaking some fairly dramatic police reforms within our own force here, and I think that is also driven by the same underlying hope that we can find a way to reduce violence, to increase safety, and also to address some of those inequities that we have seen in our system. So anyway, just thank you for your service and also for being willing to come and have this conversation with us tonight, because I think that the uncomfortable conversations is where the work gets done. And regardless of the outcome of this, I don't sense support from this council to sign on to this. I am not particularly comfortable. I don't know if I can get head nods, Dana. Are you comfortable with us signing this protest or no? Okay, so I don't feel that we're going to support it this time, but I think the conversation was really important to put out there, and I hope that it's the start of many more. And just offering myself and whoever else is willing on this council to work with you in any way that we can to move forward with safety in the county. And hopefully we can involve the prosecutor in those conversations as well.
I appreciate your time.
Yes, and thank you for
You bet.
yours. I know you sat through a lot of meetings to get to this.
No worries. I learned a lot.
We did too, and I really appreciate your perspectives. You've got a lot of experience that I don't have, and it's important for all of us to continue having these conversations as we move forward with reforms. Thank you, Sheriff. I am going to call a break because it is almost 9 o'clock, which is longer than I like to go, but I didn't feel that we could hold our guests any longer. So we're going to break for, well, it's almost 9, so let's say back at 9, so that's a 9-minute break. And we'll see everyone back for the next discussion item in 8.5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. If you could find your seats, that would be great. And I'm going to find my agenda. All right, on to the new item 6.3, renumbered from our edition. Discussion of an amendment to the city code to prohibit hair-based discrimination in East Lansing. And I don't know who the staff is on this. I'm assuming Elaine, maybe? Yes, it is. Could you join us?
I am joining.
Hello.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So the actually proposed ordinance change really is to include language that would prohibit discrimination against natural hair. As you probably know, there was legislation passed in the U.S. House of Representatives in 2020. It was not taken up in the Senate until this year when Representative Cory Booker and a few others reintroduced the Crown Act that would ban hair discrimination, and they did this in March of this year. Our city manager has put language into our personnel policies that would prohibit us from discriminating against people who wore natural hair. And so what is before you tonight is for discussion, is the consideration to put the item onto a subsequent agenda for adoption and then approval at another council meeting. There's a couple of options that can be done that were presented by our city attorney. The city could amend the human relations chapter of the city code to expressly prohibit hair discrimination in its own category, but according to our attorney, this would require the city to amend numerous provisions of the code. What we believe is a simpler and then still an effective approach would be to add a definition of race that would include hair texture and protective styles to the already existing code. And so under the section of race in the city code, it would include race traits that are historically associated with race, included but not limited to hair texture and protective styles. And so we would further then define hair texture and protective styles that would include items such as braids, locks, twists, and so forth. So that's what before you tonight. What's included in your packet is a resolution that was passed by the Ingham County Commission that, again, banned discrimination based on natural hair.
So just to clarify, the suggestion is to amend the race definition in the city code as opposed to track down every place else and make multiple changes.
Absolutely.
I think that sounds totally logical, and if it seems like it's sufficient to accomplish the goal, then I think the easier is better. Does anyone have any discussion or comment?
I just say I think the simplicity of that makes more sense. I don't like the idea of sort of adding a whole new character, and I think I'm hearing that right, that then mirrors what Representative Anthony is trying to do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it was the same approach that was taken by other municipalities across the state. And I believe Ann Arbor was one that was cited by our attorney that did the approach of including in the definition of race hairstyles. And
Comments? Questions? Councilmember Watson?
Thank you. This is a great idea. I lived during the 80s, and I have had, in comparison to my child, my oldest who's a sophomore, whose hair is natural, I have had my hair straightened, texturized, relaxed. I've had locks before, and it's nice to be in a place where there's policies like this, where I can come through doors and people don't automatically look at my natural hair and believe that I am not as qualified as somebody that has a different hair texture than myself. And as a mother of girls and even just of little people with curls and kinks, it's nice to raise them to love their hair, that their hair is beautiful, and that they are just as hireable as any other person with straight hair in America.
Any other comments or questions?
I just wanted to say I don't want to go after that. That was perfect.
Yep.
Well said, Councilmember.
Yes.
Well said.
Perfectly said, indeed. I think, is that all you need from us?
So, yeah,
Ms. Hardy?
so the next step is then for us to place this on.
Correct. Looking
the next
forward to
agenda.
it.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's let that be an example to the rest of our agenda. Okay. Item 6.4, discussion of community development block grant program citizen participation plan discussion. And this is Adam Cummins.
So Adam couldn't be here tonight.
I was going to say, I have not seen his smiling face.
He's on another city matter, but it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Matthew Apostle, who has joined us very recently as the Community and Economic Development Specialist. And actually, he joined us earlier this year as a placemaking intern and was part of that project and applied for this role. And now one of his main charges will be to lead up our CDBG efforts. So I'm going to pass it over to Matthew Apostle.
Mr.
And
Apostle,
welcome.
if you want to join us at the podium, that would be great. Thank you, Tom. Or Mr. Fehrenbach. I'm like terrible at being formal. I'm sorry, you guys. Just, call me on it if you want to have a big fancy title. I'll call you whatever you want. Mr. Apostle, welcome to council.
Thank you. Hi, council.
And welcome to East Lansing as a permanent non-intern employee.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Really a privilege to talk to you guys today. Hoping to gain some feedback on our plans to enhance the public participation process for CDBG for fiscal year 2023. I hope I can answer your questions. Obviously, if we need to think on something, we'll get a response back to council as soon as possible. But yeah, if we could scroll down to slide number 2, perfect. So obviously more details will be on this in the packet. Even more details if you click that link and look at the citizens participation plan as of right now. Staff currently will create the draft budget for the fiscal year and then bring that to council. Then council is required to hold 2 public hearings on said draft budget, and then afterwards they can move to approve it, as you guys did for 2021 already. This, along with public hearings on the CAPER, the consolidated plan, and the annual action plans as needed, are the required meetings given our current citizen participation plan, along with the timelines listed there for public notices, as well as you can see on the bottom, it says for each hearing. There will also be an advertisement displayed in the non-legal section of the newspaper 12 days in advance. Yes, you can scroll to the next one for me. Thank you. Yeah, so just in terms of enhancing the process, we have a few goals. First, enhance opportunities for public and stakeholder engagement throughout the process, identify and target populations in need for public outreach and input, identify and prioritize public infrastructure needs, improve the marketing and promotion of the public input process, and balance this new process with the staff capacity for implementation. You can go to the next one. Perfect, awesome. So currently, as long as we stick with sort of like the mandatory minimums of the 2 public hearings by council and us drafting out the budget, we can still work within our current CPP for fiscal year 2023. And that's what staff, as of right now, would plan to do. If we wanted to make any amendments to the CPP, that would be something we need to be notified of as soon as possible, and we could work on that. The plan as of right now is to establish a community development advisory committee with relevant stakeholders. Among other things, we have planned for this committee to work closely with staff and stakeholders to hold a public hearing on the draft budget sometime in February, so before the required 2 council public hearings that would take place in like the March to May range, and then they would end up making recommendations to council. Yes, we would also create a public application process for individuals, organizations to apply for the CDBG funding, such as social service agencies, infrastructure projects, etc. We would work with the Community Development Advisory Committee on this. The functions and memberships of said committee would be brought to you in a timely manner here so we can get this process rolling for this timeline for this next fiscal budget. And yes, so staff will also, over the course of the next year, be working to review the CPP and hopefully be intentional about making kind of a substantial change rather than piecemealing it for the CPP for fiscal year 2024. But yes, that's all I've got for you. Happy to answer any questions you guys have.
I do have a question about that advisory committee and how people would be chosen to serve on that and how we would, I guess, recruit or let them know that there was an opportunity. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yes, so as of right now, staff is still kind of working on sort of the functions and the membership of said committee. There's been thrown around ideas of it being chairpersons or designees from various commissions, as has been done in the past to some degree. Specific committees, we would have to get a response back to you on that, but that would be my answer.
Got it. Cool.
We have this PowerPoint in our packet.
Communication, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep, we can now.
I think there was a miscommunication between myself and Ms. Gordon. We both thought each other was posting it, so we emailed it to you as well as the next presentation.
Oh, okay.
However, because of the technology in its current state, I don't think we can actually post it during the meeting, so we'll do that immediately following the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Bacon?
Definitely want to, can you hear me? There we go. Have a role for the Human Rights Commission in this process and to have a far more diverse pool much earlier than we did last time in the process, and even where something along those lines when we're funding comes across the desk of our D&I director. So we're making sure it has passed through a couple lenses on how we're doing this, and not that there was much time on the process last year, but I don't want to have the same process we had last year with more attention to some different types of organizations, and even having presentations and some stuff done throughout the year. It's an easy thing particularly for human rights to do along the way, hearing from different organizations and vetting and doing some of that stuff throughout the year, so we don't come right up on the date and then scramble around this process. So that'd be something I'd be interested in.
Yes, absolutely. Although would be finalizing that membership, the HRC is definitely a committee chairperson or designee that we'd be looking at to be on this committee. And then, of course, the inclusion of marginalized voices in this process, or individuals who are in those income eligible areas for CDBG, would be a priority.
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Shannon, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I'll just be the voice of some history on this, because I think maybe we overcorrected from reaction that we had during my council, which was this process used to be incredibly cumbersome, and we had a big group of volunteers, and they had multiple meetings and reviews, and it was a lot, and we put the applicants through a lot for a very small pittance of grants. So it may have overcorrected. I really like the idea of maybe just pulling from the different commissions and then supplementing, but just still keeping it simple. Like, you're going to review grants, you're going to come to one grant meeting, you're going to select and make recommendations to council, and kind of keep that process simple but get broader input. And the other thing, I just tag on to what Mr. Bacon's saying, is not just is using those groups to get the word out more, because I do feel like it's sort of the same organizations that come in and they're so worthy and we always want to fund them, but there are other ones that we don't even know about in our community, and so I think just making sure we're getting that out. So.
Yes, for sure. The open application process, we're hoping, and especially working with the commissions to disseminate that, we can diversify the pool of, particularly with social service agencies, stuff like that, of applications.
And so just following up on your initial comment about needing input if we wanted to change the schedule of 2 public meetings. So right now, if we're okay with 2 public meetings and the advisory board, which sounds like it's not a budgetary concern, you're good. You don't need anything from us unless we want to dramatically increase the number of meetings, which I feel like we're low on meeting love right now.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. As of right now, if you guys don't change the CPP, we will be having the 2 council public hearings. We will also be having a public hearing before that if we do create the Citizens Advisory Committee to discuss that and then bring recommendations to you guys for your public hearings.
Cool. I'm okay with that. Does anybody have any strong feelings about more meetings? Going once, going twice? Okay, I think we're good. Any other questions or comments before we let Mr. Apostle go to his well-earned rest? Councilmember Watson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it sounds like a thoughtful process, and I'm excited to see this next place with the CDBG funds. So thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm excited to work with council on it.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Mr.
Congratulations on your new role.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Alrighty, thank you guys.
Okay, I've mixed up all my papers here. All right. 6.5, discussion of visioning process for the city-owned spaces in the Park District Planning area. This is, sorry, I have managed to totally mess up my page numbering system.
It's Tom.
It's Tom. Of course it's Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hello, thank you, Mayor. And Ms. Gordon, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the presentation here. So obviously there's a lot of momentum going on in what is known as the Park District Planning Area. And so staff thought the time might be right for council to direct us to move forward in sort of a visioning process for really the public areas in this planning area. So we are here tonight with sort of just the beginnings of kind of that conversation and a plan of how potentially to move forward with the help of some professional assistance. So go ahead with the next slide, please. So as you're probably aware, in previous iterations of our comprehensive plan, we've been talking about this area for a long time. And really, it's been identified, I think, in the last 2 comprehensive plans as the Park District. Ultimately, I think what we know today as the Park District area also includes kind of some of this area previously known as the Cultural District, but today kind of the large area just to the northwest of Abbott and Grand River is pretty much what we're talking about at this point. So next slide. So over the recent history, we have many projects that have gone into the ground or been planned for this area, including the convexity project at the corner of Grand River and Abbott, and their proposed building C. We have the Evergreen properties, and of course the MSU Federal Credit Union that just broke ground. We've recently completed an infrastructure project, DPW led, to reconfigure the streetscape and upgrade critical underground infrastructure, as well as the DDA also moving forward to demolish 3 of the 5 properties on the Evergreen and remediate those as well as regrade those. So lots of progress, and again, we feel that the time might be right for the council to consider community engagement effort around sort of the properties that are public and to the north and west. So go ahead with the next slide, please, Ms. Gordon. So this is really just a crude kind of diagram kind of talking about what the project area is, and it's not exactly correct because I think we'd also be talking about the east side of Evergreen as well. But essentially, we're talking about, the publicly owned areas, including the community center that is currently the home of Helping Hands, the streetscape, the sidewalks, and the Valley Court itself. Go ahead with the next slide. So the kind of operating question or the design question we're asking is how might we develop a community-driven urban design concept and plan the uses around these areas. So go ahead with the next slide. So staff's kind of conceptual or concept for your consideration tonight is to think about developing a request for proposal that would solicit professional support and really have a broad visioning process that would include really ultimately through stakeholder engagement, a plan for what to do in this area and ultimately how to fund it, complete with a process and timeline for critical deliverables such as the design concept itself, engagement strategies around public input, and how to engage the council and various commissions, and ultimately leading to design approval. And then really also coming with a plan of attack in terms of the various funding strategies that are potentially available. And also including insights from other communities, especially as it relates to best practices, things they've learned in terms of going through these types of processes, and some of the innovative approaches that have happened in other communities. So go ahead with the next slide. I think, in terms of staff's brainstorming over the last couple of weeks, and our history in this area, as well as conversations with previous staff, I think, obviously such a plan, we've done design charrettes, for instance, in the past. This is a little bit different because we're really focused on a slightly different area now that some of the overall Park District planning area has been redeveloped, but essentially the same in terms of we need a plan for robust engagement. We need to really reach a broad range of stakeholders. And we're looking now at, activation strategies around the park itself, the streetscape amenities. What are the opportunities now that the streetscape has been enhanced to talk about, non-motorized accessibility and things we can do within this spaces to make it more welcoming. Ultimately, obviously, the Helping Hands service is very important to the community, and we want to figure out within this plan how to continue the strong partnership that we have with that nonprofit. The idea of performance venues and where they might be appropriate and make sense, again, under the activation kind of mindset. And then again, the potential funding options. So those are all things that we would envision including in such an RFP. So the question for the council tonight, and if you want to go to the next slide, please, is really, is now the time? Should we develop this RFP? And should we devote the staff and financial resources to seek this professional assistance and ultimately engage the community in this visioning process? If so, are there other council priorities that you'd like included? And I think one additional question that probably should be raised here is, would you like us to release this RFP? Or would you like us to come back to council with a draft and discuss that? So with that, I'd be happy to take your questions and your feedback, and thank you.
I've got questions, but I'll check with council first and see if anybody else has comments or questions. Anybody? Broad hand gestures, please, because I'm having a hard time seeing with my peripheral vision. Babcock.
Just something I brought up earlier, the ramp and reinstalling the ramp and making it ADA accessible. It's getting a bit late, and I might not have been as attentive as I should be, but I just wonder if that's in this plan or what it would take for us to put it in there.
I think it's very appropriate for that to be within the scope of this plan, so I would envision putting it in.
Thank you.
Perfect. Anyone else? Councilmember Watson. Mayor Pro Tem Watson, sorry.
And when you talk about envisioning putting it in, does that mean like in the far future, or like is it something that can happen sooner?
So I can just speak to that. The problem with where the placement of the current ramp was that it cuts across a majority, like a large swath of the parcel that may well be for future redevelopment. So I think you'd probably want to figure out a way to design it into a project so that you don't put a costly, ramp in and then tear it back out. Because it does, I don't know if you can pull up the Park District planning again, the zone, the map. Can you pull that up for us, Emily? The actual satellite.
Other way.
I think you're going the wrong way, Tom.
So if you look at the back of Helping Hands, I don't know if people are aware what we're talking about, there's that swath of pathway that cuts across that parcel. So if you build a path back there, you've cut off a significant, almost a half of that parcel. So it would need to be something that would have to be designed back into a project, engineered some way to have access. But right now, it takes up a considerable portion of the entire project if you were to use a pathway. So that's the challenge with that existing pathway.
Well, and if memory serves, it was pretty steeply unnavigable, and it doesn't appear that there's really enough space to wind it.
Well, yeah, it was in disrepair, it was falling apart, and it was not at the right pitch. The
One of my
elevation
children
was
got a
wrong.
pretty bad skinned knee trying to bike down it.
So that's why it was removed, because it was a maintenance issue and it was not in good repair. But that's why it simply can't be added back in, because it cuts across the entire parcel. We can look to put it back in. I just don't know how it can be done, the engineering question.
Assuming that the community center is maybe gonna
Redeveloped.
because it's falling apart.
So I think that's a good question to put in, is how do you ensure access for the planning process? How do you ensure handicap accessibility and mobility access from the upper Oak Hill down to Valley Court? And that's the type of thing you're asking for.
Right.
So that's exactly the
Okay.
direction we're looking for.
Great. Any other comments or questions? Shanna Draheim.
Of course. So the key concepts for inclusion, that's for inclusion in the RFP? Or
Inclusion to the response to the RFP, so
Okay.
the plan of how we would work together with the
it.
professionals to, effectuate those key
Okay.
items.
So I'd recommend an addition and a deletion. Like, I think we should not in any way put in there community desired uses. We should not list community desired uses. We should indicate that we want the plan that they give us back to summarize and highlight what those community desired uses. I think when we put in examples, we are presupposing what our community might say to us. I think they said they were going to post it.
So there's no way for us to follow what we're talking about.
I apologize.
This has been happening for years.
I can only speak to what's in front of me right now, and I do apologize. I know we are going to post it. It's what he had up here. Just, Alice, so I realize where you're sitting, that's hard to see, but it is,
It's not in our packets either, Alice. We're only getting the information that's on the screen as well.
well, it was emailed to us as well.
Oh, I guess I didn't look at that.
So, but what I'm looking at is exactly this document that's up on the screen. So you will be able to look at it more closely when you do it, but it is here and it is available as we're talking here. And it's being live streamed, yeah.
Could we just forward that?
So, could you just scroll down to the key concepts for inclusion all the way down, that just so that people can track where I'm talking about at least? So I just would say in any RFP, we should not be including examples of what we think those community desired uses are, because I just don't want to presuppose and or shape that conversation at all. I think it's important that our community tells us what it wants to see there. And then I think adding in something about the plan for effective engagement, really encouraging the use of some data in helping the community to kind of understand and think through what the needs and desires are. So that you probably could provide some examples, like data. I mean, we have a bunch of studies that have been done recently on Parks and Rec. Like I know Tim and now Kathy have a ton of data on that, and we have a housing study, and there's some other things that sort of just, so I think just including something that says we really want that the community engagement process to be based on data that's presented.
Yeah, that kind of comes into one of the questions that I had, which was really, these key concepts for inclusion, were those identified as city priorities, or are those from previous stakeholder conversations? But I think that, the tidiest thing really is to base our, I think, piggybacking what Shanna said, if we include things that are fairly, performance venue is a pretty big thing that kind of cuts off some of the interest in stakeholder participation, because it seems like we've already kind of made up our mind. Although I do think a performance venue would be awesome, and I will go to a stakeholder meeting and I will say so. But I think that, a blanker slate, I think, would be more appropriate. Since we're soliciting feedback, we want to make sure that there's space for that feedback to land, essentially. Let's see. I think if we're talking about an RFP that's essentially just, a stakeholder input RFP as opposed to a design concept development RFP, then I'm fairly comfortable with staff releasing that directly. If we're talking about something that's, gets into the engineering and much more specific projects within the park, then I think we would want to review it. But I'm kind of on Shanna's wavelength, where I would like to have a blanker slate and really invite our community to tell us what they want, since it is our biggest centrally located green space, but it is completely surrounded by residential neighborhoods. We want to make sure that they feel that their ideas are included. Anyone have any additional comments?
I'll go.
Mr. Bacon.
Yeah. Looking at it, it's kind of an end game, and I think bringing back to the beginning of the meeting around the environment and other areas, I think there's a ton of considerations, as long as we're comparing apples to apples and making sure that we're not just RFPing for stuff, that we're actually going to figure out the impact on kind of one of the few green spaces in downtown in general, and obviously just don't have any unintended consequences around whatever we're going to build or link into our systems, and obviously that's thought through, but sometimes we don't know the impact until it's too late. So just getting a real feel for the possible impact and having that factored into whatever we're going to do or consider from that perspective. So.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Mr. Fahrenbach, do you have enough information from us to move forward?
Yeah, I think there's one additional thing that I just want to make sure is on the record, and that is that staff really feels that in order to have the best possible foot forward, that we really should spend some money doing some of the research, the baseline research of the property, so survey information, where the utilities are, what's on the title record, and that sort of thing. So with your approval or blessing, we'd probably do that first and have that available as part of the RFP that we put out. I think the quality of responses that we get would be much better in that respect.
Perfect. And then just to possibly state an obvious, this entire area is within the historic district, correct?
I believe that is true.
Okay, so that would be something that should be clarified as part of that, just so that people know what they're working with.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm okay with that. Anybody got any nods all around? All right, sounds great. Let's go locate some utilities and survey markers. Sounds awesome. All right, 6.6. I'm not beating any speed records for this meeting, but that's okay. We've had many great conversations. All right, discussion of draft rental conversion program in the area around Chesterfield Hills with dedicated funds. Shocking, it's Mr. Fahrenbach again.
Thank you, Mayor. So as you may know or maybe remember, I think we started this conversation in just about a year ago. After we had, or this recent iteration of this conversation, after we had closed out a brownfield plan, and there was a somewhat complicated arrangement to basically close out the plan and the development agreement and transfer the remaining funds over to an account that was established to make conversions in an area including most of Chesterfield from rental property, licensed rentals, to owner-occupied properties. And we had a discussion with the council that started this off, really asking the policy question around whether we should use the city's funds to purchase the properties outright, or whether we should use the monies to try to elicit a market response and therefore essentially be able to leverage the city's funds that we had to try to move more of the rental that were remaining, I believe there's 19, to owner-occupied. And so the council directed staff to really focus on the leveraging of the funds as opposed to using them for purchasing properties outright. And we worked with the Capital Area Housing Partnership to develop some concepts for the council's review. Essentially, they are different versions of really the same main concept, which is to offer funds for the rental licenses to be relinquished in one way or another. There's, I think, 4 concepts that we came up with, all really in line with the council's direction to focus on trying to elicit a market response. So we were drafting that program, and in conversations with the community around Chesterfield and the historic districts neighborhoods, the historic districts commission members, it came to our attention that there was interest in potentially also using the funds in this manner, but allowing additional flexibility to transfer licenses from Chesterfield into other areas in town. And we were aware that there might be some legal ramifications and practical considerations. And so at that point, the council directed us to work with the city attorney to sort of understand what those ramifications might be. And then as we moved into the springtime of this year, those efforts were essentially put on hold due to some state legislation around short-term rentals, which essentially put the resources that we were using towards investigating this to investigating that. We're now at a place where the city attorney has issued, as mentioned, a confidential memo to the council with some of the concerns that they have, and ultimately sort of a caution to that creating a transfer mechanism for licenses in that manner may create some unintended consequences. So based on that analysis, staff is back at the council sort of with our original program envisioned to allow maximum flexibility in terms of different ways of relinquishing the rental licenses, really in the spirit of the agreement that was penned, I believe, in 2006, with these $300,000 of funds that we have for this purpose in the city's budget. And so our intent would be to move forward with drafting the program for your future consideration, but wanted to have the chance to discuss this in your meeting tonight. Obviously, the city attorney is not present, but one course of action you could take if you want to discuss further the memo is to call another meeting, which you could do in closed or open session to discuss the confidential memo.
So the memo has been a subject of much discussion, and I'm kind of reviewing a few of the cautions that were in this from our attorneys, and I wanted to talk a little bit about why such memos kind of default to being confidential. So essentially what we're asking when I ask our city attorneys to prepare an opinion for us is to grade our level of risk in any action. So this is essentially a laundry list of potential challenges that we could face if we were to take such an action. So if we decided to move forward with it, the legal advice that is in this memo then becomes the checklist by which we can be challenged. So in order to protect the city's financial interest in not facing expensive lawsuits, we might not want to release that to potential people who could challenge our ruling. There's not a lot of black and white, right and wrong in city policy. We are frequently deciding on a grayscale of risk. Some actions are not risky, and we don't pretend, voting no is never risky, right? Not changing anything is never risky, or is, yeah, I think I said that correctly. But any potential change that we make in our zoning or our ordinances opens us up to dissatisfaction, and sometimes that takes the form of legal action. So in order to facilitate this discussion kind of fully, we as a council should decide whether or not we want to have this out in public. We did not kind of communicate to council members that they would want to read this closely enough to decide if they wanted it to be public. But one thing that I could do right now, if everyone was comfortable with it, is read the 5 points that are, or 4 points that our lawyers brought forward as potential complications to the transfer.
Mayor, and I don't know if it applies in this, but one thing council has done in the past or in past memos is ask the city attorney for one that would be shared with the public.
Sure.
And that perhaps they could have another shot at producing that for the discussion. If council wants to have that discussion in October, have a version that they're comfortable with the public and the council's public that's comfortable. Or, of course, you can have the time and decide just to make it released at that point.
Fair.
But that's an option as well, as to have them go back through and give you a more public opinion.
A slightly more, less of a legal potential challenging document. I guess that, that's not what we were discussing, but I would entertain discussion from council on their opinions on that topic. Councilmember Babcock?
Sure. I would think at the very least we'd want a redacted version. I mean, to give to the public, I'll look at this more carefully, but I'm not sure there's anything in here that somebody thinking about the issue wouldn't come up with. I don't see prices or anything. I wonder why this would be so highly confidential, but perhaps if they provide a redacted version, I will realize my error.
I just scanned through here, and I don't think there's anything particularly inflammatory. I was just expressing why these things default to being confidential, not specifically related to this one, but.
I agree. I mean,
okay.
And in this one, again, as you said, I certainly didn't read it that carefully for litigation risk to the city.
Right.
And so maybe if they provide something with redaction, maybe we'll see it, or maybe they'll change their minds, or change their opinions, rather.
So it sounds like due to the very legal nature of the choices before us, we probably don't want to proceed forward with an actual outline of a program right now. It seems like we've got a lot more stuff to discuss. I think at the very least, let's ask our legal team to prepare a memo that they are comfortable with us releasing to the public that covers, their basic concerns, so that we can then have a much more public conversation about this. That includes, and then of course that memo will be posted in advance so people can read it and come prepared with their comments, and we can move forward from there. Sorry, I know this has been on the table for a long time, and I know there's a lot of anxiety in Chesterfield Hills about what is going to happen with this money and how to best use it. And I think, you know, we would love to find something where we could get more bang for the buck. And I'm a huge fan of revolving funds that pay in and pay out and continue to create a legacy. So if we can do that, that would be great. But I do think that we've got to consider our own laws and the ways that we would have to change them to accommodate that, and also state laws that we cannot change because they're not our own. So I think for the time being, let's go ahead with releasing a public version of this memo.
Put it back on the agenda for discussion October 5th.
I think, yep, and we'll rally at that point.
Put it back on the agenda for October to discuss.
Discussion agenda in October.
Could I also
Councilmember Jordan.
could I also ask that I feel like I have a lot of questions that I would want to ask the city attorney as well. Like, could we
have them
here,
yeah.
and then I guess in advance of that meeting, ask them whether they think there is anything that we need to go into closed session for related specifically to those risks. I say that, but I would like to have as much of this, if not all of it, in the public eye.
Yeah.
But if they feel like there's something that is potential litigation risk, I'd just like their advice on it going into that meeting, so my brain can be.
We don't usually have our attorneys at discussion meetings, but I think in this case, since we're talking about, potentially having to change other ordinances and things to accommodate this, then it would be nice to have them here to talk to that. Cool. Okay. Anyone have any comments before we wrap this?
Yeah, just
Mr. Bacon.
Yeah, briefly, this sounds similar to the projects going on around sports and football facilities and things that drag around East Lansing for like 20 years and things like that. So I think the community members who had that institutional memory and notes and all those things, it would be nice to kind of include that, because I'm sure some stuff's been thought through for a very long time around this process, so there's no reason to reinvent the wheel for stuff that's already been built. So making sure that the people who had that institutional memory are included in the conversation going forward, or make sure they're present for that. So
Sounds good. Is that enough direction for the future? Excellent. That brings us to the end of the agenda and the part where I get to make hammering noises, and we'll see you all